Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1051. The New Representative. Seth, we have to talk. Lena personally appeared at the workshop. She seemed upset. Upset enough that she ran down to the workshops, instead of calling him like usual. The blacksmith looked up from the ornaments he was currently preparing for Ortega's new armor. He put down the file he was working with and turned to her, ready to listen. The new representative of Krna arrived today, she said with a serious face. That was today? Okay, but why did you have to come here so quickly? The bard asked, a little confused. Yes, it was today, and it's someone I know. Her grave voice had Seth prick his ears. Sounds like it's not an acquaintance you enjoy knowing, he asked, his attention fully on the conversation now. Lena shook her head. Yes. Merkraut Tsar, also known as the Peddler of Ruin, is known to be a hardliner nationalist. He is part of the faction that advocates more extreme measures for expansion. What's worse is that he's a subordinate of my second brother. She summed up the issue. That means? Seth prompted her to continue. Everything she said sounded quite grave, but Seth didn't really have any idea about the structure of Krna. So far, he had only experienced the light side. He had a good impression of Lena, Hardwig, and even the Emperor. Of course, there had been some issue during the banquet in Krna, but he couldn't expect that everyone in an empire that spanned a myriad of worlds was a good person. The second oldest is the leader of the nationalist faction and the one with the greatest chance to win the right for inheritance, after Hardwig. Now that the Peddler of Ruin is here, I'm sure the previous incident of the representative working with Spacia was also his doing, the princess explained her assumption. So we are up against the second prince, but why? Didn't you say they were the faction for aggressive expansion, or whatever? How is helping their enemy achieve that? Because I belong to Hardwig's faction, my success here in Earth counted to his achievements. Don't you get it? The better things went on Earth, the stronger it proved that our approach was the right one. But look at Earth now, only one of the original districts is left and it's just hanging in there, while Krna has barely any grasp on it now. The moment it falls to Spacia, it will be seen as a sign that we had to change our approach. Seth gagged. I hate politics. This means we are up against the second prince who is trying to serve us up to Spacia, while also being up against Spacia. Seth asked, annoyed. Do you think he also got rid of Hardwig? Lena shook her head. I doubt it. Hardwig probably dipped and hid himself before he could make a move. So, what do you suggest we do about it? The Pythian Games are just around the corner. Do we have to guard against Krna, too? He asked seriously. No, I don't think they will act this quickly, but we should prepare for the worst. You mean business as usual then? Seth commented sarcastically. He smiled as he said it, but then his expression became serious again. I will promise you one thing, Lena. No matter what happens, I will not allow Spacia to touch anything precious to me. Even if Krna tries to serve Earth to them on a silver platter, we will be the morsel that gets stuck in their throat and choke them to death. After Seth's experience in the formation of cultivators and the fight with the scene, his stance had slightly shifted. It was not just about being more proactive in taking care of dangers. His sentence had included all of Earth, not just Mina's March. The bard was no hero. He never felt like stepping up to solve the problems of the world, not if it severely inconvenienced him. This didn't mean he didn't feel empathy when faced with terrible situations. It was the twang he had already felt back in Aura and the reason he wanted to return. At the end of the day, the people of Earth were his people. He accepted that he couldn't stop all tragedies and didn't let it bother him. But there were things he could do and he decided to act on them in earnest. Lena stared at him for a moment. She had a hard time deciding whether he was crazy, or serious. The weird part was that she was ready to believe that they could pull it off. She straightened her back and adjusted her designer suit with new determination. Fine, if that is how you think, I will do my best to help. On that note, we got messages from almost all teams on outside missions. They will be back in time for the games. She shared another piece of information. Who is missing? Seth asked, surprised. Jonah and Misto are yet to contact us. Caverna. Thick mists billowed over the silent field. Pale sunlight barely made it through the cloudy sky only to fall on Earth, drenched in blood. The battlefield was a gruesome sight, filled with the bodies of valiant warriors and pitiful draftees. Walking through the mist was a solitary figure. The black leather armor and a long silver sword in his hand accentuated his tall, slender build. The figure wore a dreadfully beautiful but sinfully aloof-looking mask. The androgynous beauty and expression of the mask made the man look like a god, separated from the secular world, emotionlessly witnessing the cruelty of the battlefield. Holding his side, blood was trickling through his fingers, joining the crimson puddles on the ground. There was a gash in the armor and a big wound, that was only slowly closing. This was Jonah, the chosen of Munera, the goddess of gruesome beauty in battle. "How many does this make?" he asked, breathing in the cold, damp air. The thick white mist billowed as if disturbed by a sudden wind. Swirling, it collected into a single place beside Jonah, slowly taking a humanoid shape. Mistopheles, the mist demon, appeared beside the chosen. "That was the 15th assassin that tried to kill you during a mission." While the other teams chose to become adventurers, Jonah and Misto had become mercenaries in this world ravaged by wars. Jonah's path to legend was the Sword Slayer. He grew the most through slaughter and achievement in battles or fights in duels. They had judged that it was easier to make a name on the battlefield, instead of hoping for big adventures. However, 2 weeks after they started rising in fame, people had started aiming for him. They were not normal people or simple assassins. They were specialized to aim for his weaknesses and counter his strengths. Even with the Sword of Chains, he had been unable to make them talk. The moment they were at a disadvantage, they would take their own life. "We don't have much longer, we should find a town with a church and report back home," the demon suggested. Their life on the battlefield had not allowed them to visit flourishing towns very often. This world didn't have many of them left either. Caverna was also called the World of Wars because these states were constantly locked in blood wars inherited from their ancestors since time immemorial. The whole landscape was littered with ruins, left from places that existed and wars that destroyed them. Nobody could remember anymore. "You are right, we should cash in our money for this mission and leave this world," Jonah mumbled in agreement. "I'm afraid that won't happen." A massive figure stepped out of the mist, blocking their path. Chapter 1052 Jonah Taggart. Little Gamma, about 2 weeks later. Seth stood on a mountain, at the edge of Little Sigma's barrier, just below the crown of the tree. Looking into the distance, using Thaia's vision and clairvoyance, he was able to look over a vast landscape of mountains, past the foothills and even at the edge of the eastern plains. The blacksmith came to Little Gamma yesterday since there were only 2 days left before the entrance ceremony of the Pythian Games started. He had come up here because they had gotten news from the patrols that kept an eye on the surrounding mountains. Approaching the central mountains was a massive fleet of flying ships. They had little resemblance with the vessels Seth knew from Aura or Krina, or the flying shuttles and barks that cultivators used. Over the past weeks, the sight of their flying vessel had become more common on Earth. Their appearance was closer to space shuttles he knew from science fiction. But not the sleek, clean, chromium beasts, but ones that were covered in grease, like someone built them on a scrapyard, or forgot to mount a cover to hide the internals. They came in many different sizes, but they all paled in comparison to the central mammoth, like a shoal of fish following a whale. Seth didn't quite know how to categorize these new arrivals. Were they people from Earth? Spacia? Or some completely other new phenomenon? Most importantly, he had no idea whether they were friend or foe. At the foothills, the fleet stopped moving forward. Instead, a smaller vessel was launched from the mother ship, which aimed straight for Little Gamma. The smaller vessel looked much more polished than the rest of the fleet and approached with a quick pace. "How is it?" Mina asked, stepping up beside him. The fleet stopped at the edge of the mountains. "A small shuttle is approaching the tree station. Maybe they are just here to join the Pythian Games." Seeing that they actually dispatched a smaller vessel, instead of approaching with the whole fleet, raised his hope that they were not an additional danger. Standing at the bridge of their envoy's vessel, she looked forward to Little Gamma. Since the scouting vessel Beetle had caught onto the broadcasting announcement, she had found hope that they were not the last remains of the people on Earth. Finding actual proof that there were others out there, and seeing how they were managing fine, was a huge relief. Others called her a genius, but she was still just 17 years old. No matter how composed and determined she acted, the responsibility of leading her people, maybe the last people on the planet, was a huge burden. Arriving at New Hope, after fleeing Epsilon and weeks of living on board a ship with waning resources, had just added to her burden, not diminished it. After Beetle returned with the transmission, she kept sending small vessels to search for the path to Delta and collect more information on Mina's march. Despite wishing for it to be true, that there was someone, a place that could lessen her burden, she had a hard time believing the fairy tale of Mina's march. Even when her own scouts reported it. That was until she saw the giant tree for herself. She had a hard time keeping her stoic expression at the sight of the massive tree, sprouting between the snowy mountains. There were a lot of emotions bubbling up. Suspicion, doubt, worry, elation, nervousness, relief. She suppressed these emotions, as she had to be calm and collected mind as the commander. If she made the wrong decision, because she was too impatient or overwhelmed by feelings, all the things they had overcome so far would have been for nothing. Commander, a man riding a giant centipede appeared from the direction of the tree and is blocking our way, the helmsman reported to her. She looked at the screen which displayed the picture of a humongous centipede-like creature with a white ceramic carapace and golden accents. Sitting right behind the creature's golden neck shield was a man completely dressed in dark medieval armor. After a moment of thought, she commanded for the vessel to come to a halt. Activate the loudspeakers. This is Commander Jonia Taggart, of Epsilon's Survivor Fleet speaking. Identify yourself. Why did you block our path? She asked in a commanding tone. When the answer came, everyone hurriedly threw off their headphones. I am the Tower Master of Mina's March. What is your purpose of approaching Little Gamma? A mighty, booming voice shook the mountains and had the mountings on the bridge rattle. The transmission from the outside microphones almost blew their ears out. Despite the ringing in her ears, her heart was racing. If they really were the Tower Master, how high were the chances to immediately meet the Tower Master of Mina's Mar, before even fully arriving at Little Gamma? Whether he was honest or not, the person was definitely powerful. They wouldn't lose anything from being honest here. We received the transmission about the Pythian Games and wished to take part. We also would like a chance to negotiate with the Tower Master and Mina's March. She suppressed the pain in her ears and answered seriously. A moment of silence followed after her answer. Follow me closely, the rider instructed them and took the lead, guiding the envoy vessel toward the tree station. They followed the flying centipede along the outside of the barrier that covered the whole city. It was truly a sight to behold. Not just the giant tree that blotted out the sun, or the barrier that covered it, but the literal forest of buildings under its crown. It was such a familiar, yet exotic sight at the same time. Nonetheless, seeing a flourishing city like that touched the heart of anyone on the bridge. None of them had expected to ever see something so close to home ever again. Not after they were forced to destroy their own district and flee into the no-man's land, littered with dangers. On the opposite side, on the west side of the barrier was a smaller barrier docked onto the main one, protecting another, smaller city as well as a huge stadium. Despite sending scouts to Delta, the information they were able to bring back was mostly rumors, just enough to make this expedition viable. They had no idea about the structure of Little Gamma beforehand, but they were able to guess that this was probably the location for the Pythian Games and an additional settlement for visitors. Following the Tower Master, their envoy vessel lowered altitude beside the barrier of this outcrop. However, they did not land. I will go down to meet him. Prepare the armors. The sudden arrival of the Tower Master and the shuttle lured many prying eyes, but Seth ignored the curious audience of Erdhands, players, demons, and cultivators. Unexpectedly, the shuttle did not prepare to land. Instead, several seamless hatches at the bottom of the vessel opened and 6 hunks of metal fell to the ground. Seth's eyebrow jumped up when he recognized the humanoid lumps of metal that had just demonstrated a superhero landing. Z01 Mk3 Power Armor Helmet. Epic. Z01 Mk.3 Power Armor Set. Physical Def, 2600. Mag Def, 1800. Z01 Mk3 Power Armor Torso. Epic. Z01 Mk.3 Power Armor Set. Physical Def, 3600. Mag Def, 2500. The torso of a technological milestone created by craftsman Turner using the blueprints of the Hex engineering genius Jonia Taggart. The height of development of Epsilon and a must-have for any traveler in the wastelands. Requirements: 250 endurance, 150 agility, 150 strength. All 6 newcomers wore a full set of these power armors, making them look like bulky juggernauts. It was not Seth's aesthetics, but he had to acknowledge that they looked very imposing. It wasn't just the looks, he could clearly see the stats of the armors. His guess was that these suits were made as similar to the mix of magic and technology that was developing in Y City. They had clear advantages and disadvantages, but overall very few magical effects. As one would expect, the thick armor had an impressive defense. Apart from that, the full set raised strength and endurance by 300 each and lowered agility and dexterity by 150 each. In addition, it protected against various types of energy attacks like fire, poison, lightning, etc. The armor had a few more features like negated fall damage or limited water breathing in exchange for not being able to swim. Overall, it was a powerful tool to become an absolute cockroach. Unless the wearer met an overwhelming opponent, such as a giant monster, Seth doubted there was a lot below level 100 that could pose a danger to the wearer of such an armor. Just fulfilling the requirements to wear it showed that the wearer couldn't be weak from the start. With heavy steps, that shook the ground, the six approached Seth in his dark armor. The blacksmith was not short with his height around 190 centimeters, but the new arrivals in their massive power armors still had him looking up to them. The at their helm stopped in front of him and raised his arms, taking off the helmet. They revealed a youthful face, framed by a cascade of dark blonde or light brown hair. "Hello, I'm Jonia Taggart." Chapter 1053. As long as we had shells. After complimenting her on her outfit, Seth guided her and the 5 guards with her to the stadium administrative office, where Lena and Jane, who were in direct control of the game's management, as well as the members of Yule Cat's Fur, in charge of their safety, were waiting for them. While the guards stayed in the huge power armors, their commander returned hers to the inventory to sit down at the table with Jane, Lena, and Seth. As a staff member supplied them with drinks, another brought Seth a bunch of papers. "If you wish to take part in the Pythian Games, you can fill out this form to register for the various disciplines. For your information, this is an exception because the deadline is technically over," the bard reminded her and gave her the stack of paper. Jonia's face derailed a little, as she obviously had not thought that there would be a deadline for registration. "Thank you," she said, a little embarrassed, but quickly hid it. She was definitely a lot younger than Seth would have expected, around the same age as Evie, maybe. The true core of the conversation started with Jonia giving a brief recollection of the things that transpired in Epsilon and her role in many of them. She was the prominent daughter of the second biggest technology company that was seated in Epsilon. "Ah, now I know why your name seemed so familiar," Jane suddenly exclaimed. "You are the genius of Tag Corp," she added with a great smile. "It's a good thing someone of your caliber survived." "You know of her, Jane?" the blacksmith couldn't help but ask, seeing the woman's gushing reaction. Mary also looked at her with a questioning look. "Were you guys living under a rock or something?" "Tag Corp was a juggernaut, most of the communication tech we still use was built from their parts," Jane elaborated. She was about to sing more praises when Jonia cleared her throat. Jane realized that it probably wasn't the best time to gush about a glorious past that was gloriously crushed by the apocalypse. "I'm sorry," she apologized meekly and sat back in her chair. It's okay. You said nothing wrong. It's just, not a fond memory," the commander said amiable. The genius engineer continued her story after the short interruption. Like Gamma, Epsilon was able to cope with the start of the apocalypse. She herself gained a class called Tenacious Tinkerer, an epic engineer class when she turned 16 about half a year after the cataclysm. Although things changed with monsters and dungeons appearing at random, they were able to manage themselves fairly well. At least they thought they were. While many like herself started exploring the new possibilities magic brought with it, an enemy was growing in the darkness. In secret, their society was slowly infiltrated and corrupted. When people finally caught on to what was happening, many important figures had already been sabotaged, assassinated, or assimilated. Seth knew the perpetrators behind these actions just too well: demons. When the veil was lifted, the people of Epsilon were thrust into a brutal war as hell was summoned to their district, and demonic hordes overran those who were left. Bragmummel's lackeys knew no mercy and there was no end to hordes. We had only one choice left. It didn't help that around that time, cultivators also started appearing, kidnapping people and bringing them back to their world. In a last-ditch effort, Tag Corp revealed their fangs. With Jonia as lead researcher, they had already started building various prototypes of weapons, vehicles, and flying vessels, that were a fusion of science and magic. Evacuating as many civilians as possible, they sacrificed half their fleet to completely raze Epsilon and all of the summoning formations and demons in the city to the ground. In the short respite after their last hopeless rise, it seemed that they had dealt a fatal hit to the demons, at a great cost of their own. After much hesitation, the survivors decided to leave Epsilon for good. They scavenged what they got, built what they could, and fled from the ruins of their home. It was a tragic story. "Have you been on the move in the no man's land ever since you left Epsilon?" Mary asked, concerned, but Jonia shook her head. We found shelter at a city in the no-man's land called New Hope. We have been staying there for a while. Until we found that place we were worried to be the last people left, she said with a wry smile. Are the giants still guarding the place properly? Seth asked curious. New Hope was no news to the bard and the others. It was the birthplace of Pip and some of the other children under Karina. After fleeing from the theocracy of chains he had stayed there for a short while. Part of the people that fled with him had stayed there. He had also made a promise to Pip that he would help her if she wanted to return there after coming of age. Unfortunately, Lena's efforts to place a starter village in its vicinity had been blocked at the time. You know about the giants? Did you visit New Hope before? She asked back surprised. You could say that I'm the one who arranged those protectors for them, Seth said humbly, earning an incredulous look from Jonia. Interesting. Yes, they have been doing a good job guarding the city, they even tried to stop us when we first arrived. They were an especially great help during a recent undead invasion. Thanks to them we were able to concentrate on rebuilding the city's facilities. We prepared to stay there until we got your transmission. It was the only reason we truly believed that at least Delta survived and sent out scouts to look for a route here. Wait a moment, one step back. An undead invasion? In New Hope? Lena was the first to speak up, but everyone at the table had the same thoughts. The troops of Arjit Noor that went east to hunt people and vanished, they had actually fallen at the hands of Epsilon's fleets and the giants. They had wiped out the main forces of the undead empire station in Earth. The giants alone were not strong enough for that. It was proof of Epsilon's formidable strength. When there were any doubts about them raising a whole district, even when Epsilon was on the smaller side, they were now gone. Yes, they suddenly appeared one day, aiming for the city. The giants had some casualties before we entered the fray, the commander explained shortly. It's good to know New Hope is safe, Seth simply said with a smile. And you repaired New Hope's facilities? Seth asked, interested in a different point she mentioned. More or less. With the things we had and some repairs, we barely got them running at 20% of their original performance. She offhandedly described getting machines and facilities that had stood still for decades back to working condition, like it just took some spit and elbow grease. However, when we got confirmation from our scouts that Delta survived and Myanmar actually existed, we decided that we would like to immigrate here. Jonia finally finished her story, getting to the core of the meeting. The people of Epsilon wished to find safety and shelter in Myanmar. But why? Lena asked with a questioning gaze. Disregarding everything they just heard, this was a negotiation. This was about inviting a new group of citizens into their domain and the conditions of it. However, unlike the crowds of refugees and citizens that had come to Myanmar previously, they were a well-organized group with the power to stand their ground in Earth's wilderness. Don't you have a powerful fleet? With the power you described, you should be able to stay anywhere you want. Why would you not stay at New Hope, despite going to the trouble of doing repairs? Lena pinpointed the plot hole in their request. They had the power to seek freedom, why did they choose to join someone else? Jonia smiled apologetically. You are right, if we had a powerful fleet we may not have decided to leave New Hope, despite the many problems with the old infrastructure. I won't lie to you, things aren't as rosy for us. The commander said openly. Despite the thick power armors, the guards became visibly nervous. This was a delicate topic. I mentioned how we left Epsilon, right? Apart from the few surviving prototypes, our fleet is just a bunch of cobbled together tin cans. Although we tried improving them, but we never really got the opportunity. Even then, it was okay as long as we had shells. Well, we used most of our ammunition against the undead and our energy supply was barely enough to hold them in the air. Not to mention energy weapons, most of them don't even have a shield. As she talked, the frustration in her voice became very clear. It was obvious that these were problems that bothered her for a long time and that were the topic of many discussions in the past. Staying at New Hope, or anywhere else of that matter, would just lead to further decline until we die off one by one. That is why we decided to come here. Chapter 1054. Why are you telling me all of this? Jonia revealed their worries and future prospects with a monotone, slightly depressed voice. What about the people of New Hope? Jane asked a question that also interested Seth. We brought whoever wished to leave with us. The rest will have to rely on the giants for protection, Joanna answered with a clear conscience. She wasn't able to do anything about the people that refused to leave. I see. Before you make the final decision, do you know how the system of Myanmar works? Seth finally asked, satisfied with her answers. Her slightly clueless look was answer enough. She may have heard rumors from people on the streets, but those people didn't know what emigrating to Myanmar as such a big group really entailed. Feeling prompted, Jane began to explain. You have to think of Myanmar more as a gated community than a district. What we do is offer a safe living environment to the people, in exchange we require rent. Myanmar has no centralized governance, each tree station is self-governing in nature. Apart from requiring and supporting the enforcement of common district civil laws, Myanmar does not intervene in, or take over duties of governance. Though we maintain the right to kick out anyone we don't like, Seth interrupted the legal text with a quick commentary. In addition, there are various duties to be upheld by the governing body of a tree station, to ensure the maintenance of a healthy community. Jane got back in the monologue when Jonia wildly waved her hand or requested a break. Why are you telling me all of this? She asked, slightly exasperated. Because you fit the criteria of governing your own tree station, of course, Seth answered her with a pixie-ish smile. There were 12 tree stations, not counting Agra and Thres. Of these 12, there were only a few that could be called fully functioning cities like Little Sigma, or Little Gamma. The reason was necessity. It took an ungodly amount of energy to grow these tree cities, and Little Sigma was still the biggest, created by Karina as a massive proof of concept in the beginning. The refugees from Sigma and Gamma flooding into Myanmar from Delta made it necessary for the stations closest to the central district to take on a lot of people. Similarly, TS3, which was left to Yvette, the Saints of Samhatch, TS7 where the White Snake deity resided, and the tree stations 10 to 12, which housed the remaining populace of Ypsilon, were on the bigger side. Those in between were much smaller in scale, only holding populations in the 100,000s. This meant there was enough space for a little Epsilon, governed and guardianed by their own fleet. Although, it would not be bad to have this fleet facing Y City, everyone thought a little Epsilon was the best course of action, except Jonia. Wait, you are offering us a whole city for ourselves? She asked, flustered. The expression on her face was not one of happiness or excitement. Although she had proven herself a competent leader, she was still young. Seth had the inkling that she had hoped to escape this role, rather than suddenly having to fulfill it in an official setting. I wouldn't say it like that. After all, you would still have to integrate with the people already living there. But all the governments are democratic, so you would have no trouble dominating the elections. Jane gave a very realistic view of what would happen. She did her best to hide it, but her disappointment was visible on her face. Was she already envisioning a future where she was forced to do governor duties and take part in political discussions? Seth pondered for a moment and decided to throw out a bait. Although I'm sure you are already looking forward to leading your people into a bright future in their new home, there is a better use for someone of your talents. Seth spoke to her. Her ear pricked up. Genius engineers like you and your team could make a so much bigger difference in helping Myanmar as a whole, instead of restricting yourselves to a single city. I would be elated if you considered joining Myanmar and helping us improve our defenses, Seth said genuinely. He would have been an idiot if he didn't try to recruit them. The gods knew they needed more firepower as the world kept growing more dangerous around them. They had the money and the resources, but they lacked the know-how and the technicians. Baker and his few remaining men already had trouble building a subway cart. Now here he had a genius, with a team of people that built a fleet of flying ships from scrap. He could see it in her eyes. She was wavering. Don't worry, I don't intend to separate you from your people. We have a role we call guardians, which are usually individuals or groups of people with overwhelming strength we trust. Their duty in a station is to step up in case a similar danger encroaches on their district. You could work and research with our full support and use your gains as the guardian of your people. I will have to think about that and consult with my advisors, before making a decision, she answered hesitatingly, but Seth was sure she was convinced. When she talked about the technology and the problems with the fleet, the bard recognized her as the same kind of person as Allison. A researcher enamored with her work. It was just that the pesky apocalypse had come between her and the pursuit of knowledge, simply because there was no one else to step up and lead the remains of Epsilon. A competent leader, but an even more competent scientist, this was the impression he got from the young woman. Of course, nothing was written in stone. Jonia had many options, that didn't encompass joining Mina's march. Another option was for her people to disperse among the various tree stations, settling wherever they liked it the most. You are right. We should talk about this in more detail after the games, Seth agreed with her. Farewells were shared and Jonia left, followed by her 5 guards. When the commander and her guards left, Lena turned to Seth. "Let me guess, you will leave the further negotiations to us," she asked, seeing more work sailing toward her on the horizon. "Who else?" "Me? I fully trust you two with this. If she still hesitates, keep sweetening the deal until she agrees that she and her team become a subsidiary guild of mine as March." There was no debate about whether, or how to recruit them. Lena was just complaining about the work contribution. Though he didn't advocate to change it, it was good to have an important task. If Seth had not spoken up, she would have definitely tried to invite them. An advanced air force with high-powered weapons was incredibly valuable for various reasons. "If you would excuse me, I will go back to spending the remaining 2 days with Mina," Seth said with a smile and left. 2. Gamma, Arjit Noor. The time was finally here, the Pythian game would happen soon. His withered, cold hand strokes the grimoire in his arms. The first attempt was a failure, but he still had their support. With the materials they gave him, he would be able to finally do it. The 77th spell, carved into the black stone pages of the book. It needed a lot of preparations and rare, sanctified materials, but he had finally done it. In front of him stood a stone door, formed from grey, dim rock and covered in pictograms. Golden tablets framed the door, and there was an ident that fit the stone page of his grimoire. He stepped closer to it and started chanting from the book, as he slowly and deliberately walked around the door in well-measured steps. Had his heart not stopped a long time ago, it would be beating in excitement right now. With this ritual he would unleash a force Arjit Noor would not be able to cope with, no matter how many golems they bought. This time he would rise and crush those vermin that dared to grasp for hope. He would show them the darkness of the world. The darkness. Chapter 1055 Greet Python. Little Gamma. The first day of the Pythian Games. The massive stadium finally opened its gates. Taken along by the colorful crowd, he was flooded into the wonder of architecture. The central plaza was surrounded by ranks and booths that towered into the sky. Enough seats to fit a whole city or 3. He had stayed at Little Gamma for the past few days and had to admit that the blacksmith and his people had outdone themselves. Seth had surpassed his expectations by far. Although they didn't have a chance to meet yet, the blacksmith had sent him tickets for special seats. Back then, he would never have expected that the man he came to know as a bard and blacksmith would become the leader of such a massive organization, to the point that they would even organize an event of such scale and offer a legendary item as a prize. The first days were reserved for the contests of artistry, something he knew he had no talent in. Poulter was a warrior whose only goal was the tournament, which would be the final of the Pythian Games. As such, the dwarf used his stocky build to find his way through the mass of people and find his seat in one of the VIP booths prepared for special guests. Since he didn't partake in any of the earlier events, he took his time to enjoy the seats he was given. There was still an hour before the time of the first act, but the stadium was already filled to the brim. With interest, the dwarf looked at the other people he could spot in the seats of honor and adjacent VIP booths. The most eye-catching one had to be the Archlich, who was peacefully sitting between a handful of other undead and 2 dark elves. Undead and dark elves. Are they a delegation from Arjit Noor? The dwarf realized, surprised. Apart from the flashy undead, his eyes stuck to the old men in exotic, colorful robes. He had stayed long enough in Little Gamma to know that they were martial masters from the voracious Cloud Continent, a world with a mysterious space bridge to Earth. Once Poulter stepped into the arena, they were a group of people he had to be wary of the most during the tournament. He had heard a lot about their weird and unique fighting techniques and magical powers. He was confident in dealing with people from the system worlds, even if they came from Krina or Spacia. "Hey, Poulter, you are here, too," someone asked as they sat down beside him. It was a familiar voice, but it had been ages since he heard it. When he looked over, he saw a muscular, handsome human, sitting beside him leisurely. "Caleb," the dwarven warrior asked, surprised at the reunion with an old companion. Caleb, the wyvern knight who led their team during the evaluation. The dwarf doubted that this was a coincidence. "Are you also here for the tournament?" the dwarf asked him, leaning back in his seat. "Of course, you also couldn't resist trying to get your hands on a legendary item, right?" Caleb commented jokingly. "To be honest, I'm also using this as a way to get out. A small vacation from my old man," the dwarf said leisurely. Although they had not seen each other for a while, they had gone through life and death with each other. Their trust was unwavering. At least Poulter didn't fear Caleb would rat him out to his father. "Haha, I understand. Although it would be great to win, I doubt I can make it. My goal is getting my name out there for the last push, Caleb explained. The Wyvern Knight was now level 93 and he had done his homework. He needed to collect fame for the time once he reached level 100. The Pythian Games were a massive event, despite being held by a newly added world. There were not just VIPs like them or leading figures of forces that had a stake in Earth, but there were many noble visitors looking for entertainment. Not to mention the transmission across the whole of Krna. It was the chance to get one's name out there. A good performance here could open a bright future. They talked for a while longer, catching up on what they did and experienced after the evaluation until a great fanfare interrupted their conversation. Someone appeared at the center of the arena, standing on a hovering platform. Who? This is your favorite host, UMI Caldrob speaking. In the name of Minas Mar, I was given the honor to present the first Pythian Games of Earth to you, the denizens of the Pathworks, she spoke upbeat into a stick she was holding. Her voice was magically amplified and transmitted across the patchworks. Lena and Mary had done their best to get most major broadcasting channels of Krna to broadcast the event. Wow, Caleb exclaimed breathlessly. Hey, what's wrong, Caleb? The dwarf asked a little confused about his reaction. Don't you know who that is? The Wyvern Knight asked, but quickly answered his own question. That's UMI, the UMI. One of the most popular and famous broadcast hosts. There are even rumors that claim she is close to becoming a legendary actress, the man gushed. Poulter could only look at him with pity. He was convinced something had short-circuited in the knight's brain. While the dwarf feared for the man's sanity, the host kept going. Many of you have already heard about the Pythian Games in Olympian myth and religion, but these are a unique version. Why? Well, why don't I introduce you to the name-giving deity of our event? A big cheer for the guardian deity of Little Gamma, Python, the attractive host exclaimed and shifted away from the stadium's center. The whole place shook like an earthquake, when the earthen floor of the arena broke open and a massive, armored snake towered into the sky, her imposing and terrifying gaze wandering over the grow. Python was revealed to the world, live and in color on television. Python's presence silenced the stadium, as everyone could only stare at the golem snake that had just burrowed out from the foundations of the stadium. See, correct me if I'm wrong, but, did that thing grow since last time? Caleb asked an octave higher than his normal voice. Poulter couldn't speak, he could only nod slowly. The dwarf also felt like she had become even bigger than before. After a moment of silence, it was broken by the uproarious cheers of the crowd. At first, it was only people from Little Gamma cheering. Many of them had witnessed situations when Python saved travelers or defended the city from monsters, or cultivators. Their genuine cheer caught on, and before long, the adventurers and players in the stadium were also cheering. Seeing the reaction, Python lowered her head, giving a polite bow to the audience before vanishing back into the earth, not leaving even a single displaced rock. The center of the stadium looked like it had never been disturbed. After Python was gone, UMI returned to the center of attention. Before we begin with the first contest, let me iterate the program for today and the following event. Earth's Pythian Games are split into two sections. The first will be the traditional contests of artistic skills. We will witness artists compete in theater, poetry, lyrics, and music. They will compete in front of a panel of famous judges invited from all over the Pathworks, who will award them points based on their performance. She paused for a moment. The second segment will consist of physical contests. From timed races to contests of strength and endurance. We will slowly ramp up the action until we finally reach the two main events of the Pythian Games, which I'm sure everyone is looking forward to. A great obstacle race that will make even S-rank adventurers shiver. Especially since there are no rules. And, of course, the Great Martial Tournament, where the winner can earn a legendary weapon. The cheers of the crowd were like the roaring of ocean waves. This was what they came for. The martial tournament would be a competition of skill and accumulation, but the obstacle race was a brutal contest of schemes and ruthlessness. Now that the official stuff is out of the way, let's begin with the first discipline today. At the head of the oval stadium, opposite the entrance to the arena floor, was the private booth of Minas March. Below it, a row of banners now fell, revealing the panel of judges. A whisper traveled through the crowd. Most people who came here from the Pathworks knew at least one or two of them. Chapter 1056. The Judges. The traveling sound, Master Bard Garmin del Prado, she introduced a scrawny, wizened man with a long beard held in a thin strand by many brass beads. He wore the typical colorful but travel-worn garb of a minstrel. The crowd rose in cheers, especially the visitors who actually heard of him before, or watched his performances. A small, friendly smile played around his lips as he waved at the crowd. The century scribe, master poet Anton Skys, the tall, thin man was introduced. He had a long face and glasses that made him look strict, yet his fingers incessantly kept playing with a golden quill pen. He only gave the crowd a small smile and a nod. The one and only, the witch of the violin, Violet Viola, she introduced an old hag. She was unruly sitting on her chair, completely ignoring the crowd, as she inspected the splotches on her dirty garb, as if she was deliberating whether to taste them or not. Yet, the applause for her was the biggest. She finally acknowledged the stadium's existence in her whole, wrinkly face deformed as she looked like a leather boxing glove. Next we have a famous musician and songwriter of Earth, Keith Richards, whose music has been enchanting Earth's people for decades. The man at the center was called out. A man, looking old as time, but still filled with great vigor, waved at them with a confident smile. The dean of Earth's Demon Bard College, Dean Remington, the demon, second last to the right, was introduced. The cheers and applause were polite, as Ember's grandfather stood up and gave a bow. He was not a very widely known face, but people respected his prestigious role. Demonic bards were not unheard of across the worlds of the Pathworks. Last but not least, we have a guest from the mysterious voracious cloud continent, Zither Saint Teslin Xylee, a lady on the far right was introduced. She had a quiet and aristocratic air about her and received the crowd's cheers with a quiet smile. The applause was not as uproarious as the others, but this time many of the cultivators present joined in. Minas Mar had spared no expenses in hiring a well-known and illustrious panel of judges that could be acknowledged by all of the audience, no matter their origin. It was a shame Seth wasn't among the judges. Poulter and Caleb knew that he acted as a bard during the evaluation, but he probably didn't have the reputation to make an impact as a judge. Since you all now know our judges, it's time to begin with our first content. As you all should know from the program, the first contest is for the solo musicians. UMI call drops announced to the waiting crowd. The entrants made the solo acts, differentiated into singers and musicians. Applause for Hao Ying, known as the fleeting flute. The presenter announced the first act. Especially the cultivators among the crowd cheered. It was a tall, slender man, his robes clearly identified him as a resident of the cloud continent. In his hands was a long silver flute, almost the length of his height. When he set it on his lips, a clear melancholic sound directly entered their ears and went to their heart. Poulter instantly thought of home, of his childhood, of the lost time of innocence. These were not amateurs. Of course, this was not an open audition, but the finale. The musicians had already been curated beforehand and every performer was a well-known figure of their respective origin. Announced were about 20 acts in each category of the arts segment. All musicians had their very own style, often influenced by the place they came from. No matter what instrument they used, the cultivators usually played very calm music. The people of the Pathworks were similar in a way, although they were slightly quicker on average. However, everything seemed slow compared to the demonic bard and members from Earth. While their music almost seemed chaotic, the beat and rhythm were hard to resist, having the whole audience sway to the music. It touched them in a different way from the often calm songs of other artists. Poulter found it crazy how much the music affected him. He had never thought himself very musical, but he constantly felt his emotions sway, or his feet bob up and down. The dwarf had never expected that he would enjoy the prelude to the tournament this much. If he was honest, he had to admit that he was not overly excited about the artistic segment, but like many others, he was proven wrong. It wasn't just the musical talent that convinced the audience, but also the effects they had. Poulter had never expected the extent of a bard's ability. The first day consisted of 40 solo acts, singers and instrumental musicians, giving their performances and being judged by the panel. Each act not just enraptured the audience, but also granted them a slew of buffs with their performance. After all of them had their go and were judged, the top 5 of each category contended against each other once again. But first, they had a break. While the people on the cheap seats had to do with food vendors, Poulter, Caleb, and other people in the VIP lounges had access to a selection of full-course meals, cooked by the chefs of Minas March. While eating a great meal, Poulter had no idea when he was ever so excited about music. None of the people he knew at home could compare to the level of the contestants here. Would he ever be able to enjoy music again? Was this the level of music the people of Krina usually enjoyed, or would they be as overwhelmed as him? How in the world did they manage to get the violent witch to be part of this? Bar thought incredulously, looking at the scene before him. The manager of the auction house in Delta was also given a VIP seat, and now he was questioning his common sense. It wasn't just the makeup of the panel, but also the assembly of contestants. The manager knew that there were powerful bards out there, spread across the many worlds of the Pathworks. However, the bard was not the most popular class. To think they would be able to collect 40 of such caliber, some of them even natives of Earth, was incredible. Especially, when these were just the solo acts. The tapping along of his foot slowed down when he realized the scope of the whole operation. It was only the first day and the games were already on this level, and all of this was in honor of a single deity. Bar had no idea what Python's level was like, but judging from what he saw earlier, was this all an elaborate ruse to push it over the final threshold to godhood? Didn't the people of Myanmar know what would happen once a being of legendary or comparable rank appeared in a world? He had to warn them. If the system god's blockade for legendary existences fell, there was no telling what could happen. Especially when it happened so publicly. Although the great empires had a treaty against the use of legends in new worlds, not everyone had signed it. Independent legends or creatures from the Pathworks could see it as a chance for conquest. He invested quite a bit into Myanmar and had made a good profit on the Tower Master's purchases and sales. It would have been a shame to lose them. During the break, Bar tried to find his way to the booth of Myanmar, but he was unable to make his way through the crowd. He was not the only one, trying to talk with the Tower Master. There were many nobles and ambassadors from kingdoms and empires on other worlds that tried to tie a connection or recruit the master blacksmith. Yet, no matter their status or their request, none got past the pretty lady, wearing an intricate black lace dress. Bar had never seen her before, and he was quite sure he knew most of the guild's members. At least the core player. Despite his confusion, he couldn't help but notice her absolute eloquence in dealing with the high-ranking figures who approached. With confidence and wisdom, she took only a few words to placate and send them away. When it was finally his turn. Mr. Bar, nice to meet you. He didn't even have a chance to introduce himself. It seems I'm at a disadvantage. You already know who I am, but I don't know yours, Bar said a little flustered, but didn't forget his business smile. After all, he was the manager of the auction house. He wouldn't falter that easily. I'm Love, and I act as Lady Mary's bodyguard and assistant, she said with a light bow. Nice to meet you, Bar answered her light bow with one of his own. Would it be possible for me to meet the Tower Master? I have something important to warn him about. The games may be more dangerous than you imagine, he whispered so only Love could hear him. The young woman's eyes glinted with a wisdom unfitting for her age before a knowing smile appeared. Myanmar appreciates your worries. Currently, if you can't meet the Tower Master, but I will inform him of your intentions later. I can assure you, that Myanmar is aware of the dangers. Lady Lena made ample preparations in that regard. It was her last sentence that convinced Bar, as he realized that the princess was involved in all of this. Any dangers he could warn them of, she would have known long before, if their decision was really to help Python ascend. Although his worries were for nothing, he was convinced that his intentions were noticed. What the girl said, did not sound like an empty. Mr. Bar, you should return to your seat now. The break is almost over and you might miss the first finale if you linger any longer, she reminded him. Seeing that his warning was unnecessary, he didn't want to miss the show. With a nod, he said his farewells and went back to his seat. With Lady Lena taking care of it, he doubted they would get to see Python ascend if it really happened. Chapter 1057 Olympian Leg of Song. Seth learned a lot, by listening to the music of the contestants. It was similar to watching a more skilled blacksmith work on a great piece. The proficiency of Seth's singing and instrument mastery rose by a sizable amount, the latter even rising to journeyman level 7. The blacksmith experiences good gains, despite multitasking during the performance. In the private booth of Myanmar, the bard had his workshop summoned and was meticulously engraving a set of silver bones. As for the reason he was suddenly trapped with work when he was supposed to enjoy a great event like this lies in what happened a few days prior. 3 days before the Pythian Games. Jonah and Misto arrived at the lobby of Myanmar, shocking everyone present. What shocked them was not the sudden and unannounced return of the two field team members, but the state they were in, when they collapsed on the floor at the entrance to the magic tower. The mist demon was covered in black cuts, oozing dark pus that drenched his robes. But he was still looking fine, compared to Jonah, the swordsman he was holding in his arms. The sanguine swordsman with the beautiful mask gave the onlooker a dreadfully beautiful and tragic scene. Jonah, clinging to Misto for support, was not just covered in similar wounds, was missing his lower right leg. What was bewildering to the people of Minas Mar was, that Jonah's wounds did not heal. The chosen of Munera was easily the person with the greatest health regeneration, backed by his class, skills, and items. Regenerating a limb was a matter of hours at worst. I have no idea what this is, I only managed to purify part of it, Linri, the priestess of the fount said after trying her best using advanced healing magic and purification. She abstained from stating the obvious. It was some kind of poison or curse that was invading the wounds of the two returnees and hindered the healing process. Despite purifying the black pus, the wounds could not be healed by means of system magic or system-assisted regeneration. During the next 2 days, they found that the wounds healed naturally and reacted positively to simple medicines. The problem was Jonah's leg, as limbs usually didn't simply grow back for normal people. I see, the blacksmith said after having a look at Jonah's slowly healing stump. He knew what he had to do and he was slightly more comfortable with it now than the first time he faced this problem. Had this been the first time they faced such a weird phenomenon of the system not affecting a wound, they may have been helpless, but they had Evie as a precedent. The girl that lost her arms, just before she was registered with the system. Seth had no idea how it was done, whether it was a special skill or secret poison or curse, but somehow, Jonah was not suffering the same phenomenon. His soul was not damaged but his leg became unregistered from the system and was no longer affected by its powers and rules. The solution for this back then was creating new bones for Evie's arms and infusing part of her living soul into them. Looking back now, it was the start of how he made Fair, though their souls were ones that died before. However, knowing a solution and going through with it were two different things. Originally, Seth would not dare mess with a living soul, as he did with Evie's. Her soul as an immortal witch was special. Even when his skills had improved tremendously since then, he had to explain it all to Jonah first, before he could make a decision. After all, this was a procedure that involved messing with a man's living soul. If he did anything wrong. After all, there was always the option of a normal prosthetic. With Earth's technology and the system's magic there were ways to create an advanced prosthetic that. Thanks for warning me, but I want you to do it, Seth. Just how long would I be out for, if we waited for a prosthetic to be made and then it would still just be a lame excuse for my leg? Seth, if there is a way to get my actual leg back, I want to try it. Even if it is risky, I trust you, the man covered in wounds said intensely. There was a fire in his eyes, one that Seth had never expected to burn in Jonah's eyes, especially. This man wanted more than just to be able to walk again and even more than to get back in shape. He had a goal, and he needed the best substitute for his actual leg he could get. You still won't tell me what happened, the blacksmith asked, facing the gaze that clearly sought revenge. Jonah shook his head. His fists clenched and he seemed stressed, remembering something. Not yet. I'm not ready. Maybe later, he pressed out. Seth looked at the man, sitting in his sickbed calmly. What or whoever did this to him had left a severe trauma that stopped the sanguine swordsman from sharing what happened. However, Misto also kept silent about the enemy they encountered. Maybe it was more than a trauma that had them stay silent. All right, I will make you that leg and you make sure to get whoever did that before they do it to someone else, the bard finally assured him with a smile. And so, Seth ended up working on Jonah's new leg and foot bones during the start of the Pythian Games. Although the blacksmith had his doubts about the procedure, because he knew exactly what could go wrong, he also had an interest in getting Jonah back in shape as soon as possible. From the people that returned from the other worlds, Jonah and Misto had actually reached the highest level. The swordsman had reached level 162, while the demon was level 157. Level-wise, they were now in the same league as Wolfram. With their relic and legendary loadout, they would even be comparable to the dull grey knight. That was why Seth also had some motivation apart from helping a friend, to get Jonah back into fighting condition. Seth was sure the Pythian Games would not blow over calmly and it was better to have everyone they could on their side. This was not just about their lives and their survival, but also their business. If something happened during the Pythian Games, a lot of people would affected, not just Erdhans. They had high-ranking guests from nobility all across the Pathworks in the audience, in addition to the contestants in the artist categories who were all widely known and influential. Even if something happened, they had to deal with any disturbances in a capable and calm fashion and this was only possible if they had the confidence backed by an overwhelming advantage. Since they didn't know who would try to make trouble, it was best to be present in full force. If that wasn't enough, then they were simply out of luck. Since he decided to do it, Seth didn't hold back on the materials or craftsmanship. The material was the new Olympian silver. Seth also finally knew was effect the legendary material refined from tranquil silver did in addition to the improvement of skills and magic. Apart from doubling the power of skills, Jonah would cast through the leg, the Olympian silver came with the effect mind soothing. This effect increased mental power by 25%, raised resistance to mind-related status ailments by 25%, and lowered the resistance to sleep by 10%. Mind soothing came with a slight drawback, but the effects were really good, for a passive improvement. The blacksmith didn't intend to treat the bones like items and overload them with enchantments, so he simply added one of the enchantments he had unlocked by reaching Master Leave 2 in enchantment. It was called Minor Olympian Endurance and he hoped it would help Jonah not being such a glass cannon. The description of the enchantment was said that it would raise basic defense, as well as the endurance attribute. By the time the finale of the solo singers ended, Seth had finished assembling an enchanting skeletal foot, fibula, and tibia made of pure silver and covered in intricate engravings. Ding! You have created a legendary item. Plus 100p of power of existence. Ding! A synergy between the situation and your trait Olympian myths has changed your item and strengthened your trait. What Seth had not expected was that his trait would appear at this juncture. What had happened? The answer came when he appraised the lower leg. Olympian leg of song. Legendary prosthetic. 1 mind soothing. 2 plus 200% power on skills and spells. 3 aura of music. A prosthetic created by the hands of Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Like Hephaestus who created a shoulder of ivory for Pelops in the wake of a divine festival, Master Smith created this leg in the middle of a great ceremony, allowing the item to absorb some of the powers it was exposed to during its creation. Seth had completely forgotten that Hephaestus also counted as the god of prosthetics with the legend of Pelops' shoulder as the main example of his works in that direction. The power the leg bones absorbed were of the songs that the musicians and finalists had sung to the audience, granting it the aura of music. Aura of music. Where there is dance, music will follow. Whenever the prosthetic is used in a kind of dance, it will replay some of the music it absorbed during its creation at random with 25 to 75% of the original song's power, granting the corresponding buff. Seth didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. Wouldn't Jonah hate this? He already accepting the legendary mask with gritting teeth. What would he say if his leg broke out in song, whenever he danced? Seth couldn't help the malicious grin on his face, when he thought of that scene. Whether Jonah liked it or not, he didn't have a choice in this. From now on, he would play his own boss theme. Chapter 1058 Juice and Sticky Stuff. Now that the nice part was finished, came the dirty one Seth could do without. He was not a surgeon, and playing with the bloody part of another person, with all the juice and sticky stuff was his nemesis. Since Jonah was absolutely silent as the blacksmith cut open his stump and removed what remained from his original tibia and fibula, Seth was convinced that he was the one suffering the most in this process. With a gag-inducing pop, the silver bone found its new place in Jonah's leg. Once the bones were set, Seth spent half an hour washing his hand, before returning to the others in the booth. The only thing missing now was infusing the part of Jonah's soul that was supposed to be the lower leg into the bones. This was usually not as important because souls are quite adaptable, but Seth tried to do his best, to make the recovery as quick and easy as possible. Thoroughly inspecting Jonah's soul at the place of the cut, Seth was able to identify step by step the piece that had formed back after the leg was cut off but still held some of the information and traits of the cut leg. On that note, Seth was convinced that apart from cut nerves, it was these kinds of remnants of a partially formed back soul, that would sometimes cause phantom pains for many people. Now he just had to carefully unfold those pieces and reshape them to the leg they once were. It was a weird sight for the people in Minas Mar's booth, to watch the spirit blacksmith hammer an intangible material none of them could see. Only Jonah could have felt the hammering on his soul. Once he was satisfied with the progress, he began attaching the soul to the bones they belonged to. Starting from the knee, bone by bone, the part of the soul was infused into the foreign item. This was the easier part for the craftsman and soon, Jonah was ready for a foot bath in the water of Styx. Ack! Gah! Jonah's stoic expression finally broke, as he started whining and twitching. It's cold and it feels like ants are biting my bone marrow. This had to be the worst pain of a sleeping foot waking up I ever had, the swordsman cried at the question of what was wrong. When the silver leg bones finally left the waters of Styx, Jonah's eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness, as his flesh started quickly growing from his knee down, along the new bones. Seth couldn't imagine what this must feel like, but he kinda thought Jonah was exaggerating. It wasn't the first time the man lost a limb and regrew it. Even when this was a little different, it couldn't be that bad. Right? What happened? The man in question asked, waking up shortly after a new, pristine leg had shaped around the new bones. What do you mean? I didn't lose consciousness, I heard a system notification just before everything went dark and when I woke up, he denied losing to the pain. Oh, what did it say? Lena asked him curiously. System restart initiated and system restart successful, Jonah answered seriously. Now you are just joking with us, Lin reasserted. I am serious. It's what I heard, he insisted. Well, whatever it was that made you faint, your leg is fixed now. How about you try walking around a little? Seth interrupted them. Jonah nodded and pushed himself off the chair he was sitting in. The fresh, pale feet touched the cold tile floor and nothing. Apart from the leg being still a little rosy, it seemed to work perfectly fine. Jonah walked around, testing and jumping, but he didn't stumble or fall or miss a step. It totally didn't seem like he was just given a fresh set of metal bones. It still feels a little numb in some places, but it's getting better as I speak. I think after some training, I won't be able to feel any difference, Jonah judged the leg with a tint of joy in his voice. Soon he started jumping around when suddenly, Amino Dori. Amino Dori me, a song started bursting out from below his knee. Ding! Your health regeneration has risen by 20% for 3 minutes thanks to listening to Amino. Everyone listening got the same notification. Incidentally, this was the song of one of the finalists. It had not been that long since they heard this song. What have you done to me? Jonah exclaimed in terror. I told you there would be consequences, didn't I? The blacksmith countered with an amused grin. But this. Jonah stuttered, having a hard time coming up with what to say. It's a positive effect, whenever you burst out in dance, the leg will sponsor some music to accompany you, Seth explained with a shrug. Could you pipe down, I want to see the award ceremony in peace, Ellie, the slime rancher called out from the front row. While Seth had been working on the leg, the two finales below had come to a conclusion and it was time to give them their prizes. Although the artist and sports competitions could not compare to the tournament with the final prize being a legendary item, the top 3 got a trophy, and prize money, while the number 1 place was also able to choose an epic or relic-rated instrument from the few successes of Seth's instrument maker grinding. Even when the contestants were already illustrious and powerful enough, that an epic item was no news to them, all the instruments were made with wood from the guardian tree, which came with the rare double attribute of protection and life steal. Especially life drain on music was something comparatively rare. Even if they didn't need it, like the solo singers, selling it would bring in another heap of cash. The winner of the solo musicians category was actually the young man with the overly long flute who was the opening act of the contest. As for the winner of the solo singers, it was a young female musician from the Pathworks. And I can really choose an earth-grade instrument as my prize, he asked overwhelmed, looking at the collection of instruments in front of him. Although they were not instruments he was very familiar with, the quality couldn't be questioned. I will take this strange pipa, he announced and took a lute from the items on display. The female singer girl chose a harp and like this, the first day of the Pythian Games came to an end. As the people slowly left and the stadium emptied for the night, the booth of Minas Mar turned quiet and more serious, as they turned to more serious business. Using various holographic consoles, the members went through the report about the situation in Little Gamma and the other tree stations. The atmosphere calmed once they went over most of it, finding out that it seems everything was calm today. There were the usual disturbances but no signs of any organized movements, Mary concluded after everyone gave their summary. Dim also has not yet found anything suspicious. Maybe they are waiting for the tournament. Seth guessed. He had created a golem from the fragment of Dig Dimblood's soul. Of course, the Leprosian's horrible personality was thoroughly bound by the golem ego and a soul contract. Currently, the golem with the power to turn invisible was scouting the city, looking for suspicious activities in the dark nooks and crannies. Right. The Martial Tournament will have the most high-profile guests and estimated viewership. If they plan something big, it will probably happen during the finale, Monique gave her judgment. Even if that is true and things will stay calm until then, that is no reason to lower our vigilance, Love commented. Right, there is no guarantee they won't pull anything before that. Lena agreed gravely. Seth clicked his tongue. Why did these have to do so much foreshadowing? Chapter 1059 Former Gamma. Former Gamma, territory of Arjit Noor. A darkness had spread across the dry desolate wasteland and the crumbling streets of the former district. Only the center of the land of death, which was covered and protected by the magic charms of their god emperor, was not covered in the shadow. Spreading like ink, the darkness glinted like tar and creatures pulled themselves out of the viscous shadow. Standing freed from the tar that held only them like a shackle, they roared in joy over their new freedom. Forming lines on the ground were tall, jackal-headed warriors, their bodies sinewy and desiccated, looking like they were mummified and rehydrated by the vicious black liquid. Climbing the abandoned ruins and remodeled spires of the undead empire, were similar creatures with tar-black wings and the skeletonized heads of birds of prey. In a matter of less than an hour, Arjit Noor had lost most of their territory and faced a siege at the heart of their feudal capital on Earth. Thousands of creatures of unidentified origin were raised at their doorstep and pushed against their doors. Sparks flew through the air as fights broke out all over the city, whose streets lay now in darkness. Almost 100% of the low-ranking undead, mindless creatures in charge of menial labors, were lost in an instant, facing the surprise attack. Skeleton Guard, Zombie Knight, Iron Golems, and servants of similar rank were locked in combat against the almost 3-meter-tall attackers, wielding black sabers and spears. The enemy had appeared behind their borders, where only a few combat troops were stationed. Without the highest seat, who was at the Pythian Games, they had a hard time gaining control and organizing what little troops they had in the chaotic onslaught. Most undead, even the better ones, were not much more than puppets to their necromancer. Low-ranking necromancers fell even before their troops. From what they could tell, only some of the Spire Master were able to react in time and defend their position. But they were unable to leave their position. With the controllers not present, or having a hard time themselves, only undead with a rudimentary ego were able to adapt to the situation on the streets. At this point, it was the knight-shaped iron golems proving their worth. With the people of Arjit Noor unable to give them clear commands, they automatically formed smaller squads among themselves, fending off creatures rising from the ground. But they were not in great condition. It was mostly thanks to their superior durability that they resisted the initial sneak attacks, but it didn't mean they were undamaged. Even if an iron golem had a slight advantage in a 1v1 fight against a creature, they were vastly outnumbered and limited by their power source. Their demise was just a matter of time. A creature looking like a black slime, pressed into a humanoid shape and wearing a grey robe, made a sound like it was clicking with its tongue. "What is it with this world?" a dried-out zombie beside it said, pissed. They had rarely faced such problems on foreign worlds, however. The slime beside it shook its head. "For once, this is not a phenomenon of this world. I can clearly feel a sort of divine power in these things. Someone is using the power of a god to mess with us. Judging by the appearance of the army, it might be the work of a Heliopolitan artifact," it gave an emotionless conclusion. "Yeah, okay, whatever. What are we supposed to do?" the zombie elder asked the other council member. They were currently losing a lot of the foundation they had finally managed to build up on Earth. If this went on, they would have no face left to return to Arjit Noor. The Empire had even sent them money and reinforcements to secure and widen their territory in this world. Something was jamming their communications, so they had no way of knowing the situation of the troops at the border, but they could observe the condition of the district, and it was far from good. Even the golems they had bought for a lot of money were being whittled away in front of their eyes. Unfortunately, all the commanders are at the border,